Is the world getting serious about peace in the Ukraine? Can Ukraine get a just settlement? Late last week, it was revealed that the United States and the West have held secret meetings to broach the topic of a negotiated peace to end the war in the Ukraine. This is not the first time that peace has been discussed, but this time it is different. The U.S. and most of the Ukrainians' benefactors were involved in the discussions, so there's a strong likelihood that something more substantive talks with the international community of a truce and a negotiated peace will be forthcoming. The timing of this conversation of a negotiated peace were started after the failure of the Ukrainian summer offensive, and this does not bode well for the Ukrainians' bargaining position. This paper will not discuss what a peace could look like or how the negotiations will proceed, but more about the situation that the Ukrainians is in starting these peace talks, or forced to come to these peace talks by the West. The Ukrainians' hope for a battlefield victory in a war they did not want was always a long shot. The Russian army is larger and has a larger population to support this army versus Ukraine. Russia has more ships, tanks, APCs, artillery, munitions, and an air force than the Ukraine does. Russia is energy independent, and it has considerably more wealth than Ukraine. Russia has also worked around Western sanctions to continue to sell oil and natural gas to keep the flow of currency to support the war. Ukrainians, for their part, brought an absolute ferocity to their defense and put a nearly inept Russian army on its back foot, as the Ukrainians were able to put up a defense beyond all expectations. This defense opened an opportunity for Western aid to flow and to help stay in the fight. This aid increased as it continued to put up an effective defense that extracted high casualties from the Russian aggressors. The Ukrainians put up a much greater resistance than the Afghan army did against a stronger opponent and did so with less aid. The Ukrainian defense effort cannot be dismissed. Despite this spirited defense, the surprising 2022 spring offensive, there was no real prospect that Ukraine could defeat the Russian invasion on a battlefield unless the West became directly involved. The only hope was that either Russia gave up the fight or the Russian government fell. The defeat of Russia was going to require outside factors, war casualties, sanctions, to create an internal instability to create either the need to end the war or replace the government. It was not going to be from a strategic battlefield defeat. The West erred in that it did not provide an off-ramp for the Russians to pursue a negotiated peace. Only negotiated option offered to Russia was surrendering all its 2014 and 2022 gains. So victory was going to rely on replacing of the government. There would be no other pathway to victory without the replacement of Putin if the West was not going to commit its own troops. The problem now is that the Ukraine government and military officials admit that the battlefield is now in a stalemate. All the Western aid in the form of advanced artillery, armor, and APCs could not dislodge the Russians in the summer offensive. The Russians signed agreements with Iran and North Korea to put it in a better position to support siege warfare in Ukraine, which is something that Ukraine cannot win. The failure of maneuver warfare and a stalemated static battlefield is detrimental for a foe with a smaller army and population. The summer battlefield failure and the unfavorable position for the winter has made the West realize that the war would either require a much larger injection of Western military aid or the war needs to end. A larger injection of military aid does not seem possible as Western stocks run low and politically the war is getting unpopular. This will put the West and Ukraine at an unfavorable position at the peace talks. Russia will know that they have an advantage in the negotiations. This was the mistake the West needed to avoid. They needed to come to the peace table after Ukraine improved its military position and not degraded it.